So you're welcome to this webinar. We are going to whip through this topic, roles and responsibilities of the board. Becky, you can change the slide, which is the third topic in a series of 5 in this governance module. You can see it there, roles and responsibilities of the board. Next slide. We have 9 standards in this one, so it's quite chunky, which is why we're going to have to move at a pace. So please don't be shy when I'm asking you a question. Otherwise we won't finish. So here's a summary slide with those 9 things on one screen. 9 things that any board is responsible for. So they have to ensure that the organization is legally registered, they're compliant, they appoint, monitor and support a director or whatever the equivalent is. They're responsible for child protection and safeguarding policies. Number 11, HR policies and working conditions. 12, the performance of the organization and its management and risk management. 13, financial processes and the finance policy. 14, they're responsible for developing, reviewing, approving strategies and budgets. And 15, responsible for staff management, whether there's adequate staff and competent staff to deliver what they're asking for. So just having that in front of a board, I think before anybody is ever invited onto a board, they need to understand their responsibilities and make sure that they're ready to give it time. It's much more than turning up for a quarterly meeting or whatever. Next slide, thank you. What we're going to do, we're going to look at each one briefly. The standard in full, it has an example of what that might be evidenced with. And then I'm going to ask a question, take just 2 or 3 very brief answers, because I want us to get to the end when we're going to be looking at maybe a structure. So number 7, the board ensures the organization or church project is legally registered in some form. And obviously the way to prove that is to show your registration documents with the authorities. And next slide. My question here is, what is the legal requirements for registration? So some of you might be a church, some of you might be a school, some of you might be an NGO or a CBO, or you might know. So can anybody just give us some points? You can open your microphone rather than write in the chat. That makes it far more interesting for those who are listening. So what legal registration might be required?
In Uganda, an NGO certificate might be required for anyone, whether it's a church or NGO. Churches are actually.
Thank you, Paul.
Yeah.
Okay. For churches, is it NGO or something else?
Some churches are registered as NGOs and others are actually registered as company, and there is also a registration for a faith-based organization.
Right. So there's no church registration as a church or a place of worship if it's not a church?
That is under faith-based organization.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Any other before we move on? My understanding is that a CBO is easier to register, but you can only operate within a very small area. And then an NGO, again, it's in Uganda, it's linked to a geographical area and you have to state where you will be working. Okay, let's move on to number 8. Standard number 8 is about the board ensures the organization or church project complies with its governing document and the local laws and any other requirements. So we would ask to see your governing documents and to see how you're complying with them. And on the next slide, I ask a question which you're probably expecting. What are the laws that you must fulfill? Once you are registered, what are you required to do to be legally compliant? I think we're all today from Uganda, so we can talk about Uganda. Although if Zim or Tanzania is here, then they're also welcome to share.
Have
A TIN number, okay, so that's a tax identification number. Thank you. Anything else you're required to do legally?
Yes, there is annual returns.
For tax and Companies House?
Yes, please.
There are MOMAs, Memorandum and Articles of Association.
Okay. I believe that NGOs are required to submit data of how many child beneficiaries they've been working with. Is that to Ministry of Education or to the NGO board? Sorry, Ministry of Gender.
I think
To the Ministry of Gender, but it's also included in the information you submit to the NGO board as in returns.
Okay, thank you. So it's there's quite a lot, and I know that it can be very time consuming. So having, I guess, an annual calendar when you know when those things have to be done by, and the board has that calendar and is making sure that the staff have everything they need in order to keep themselves on track. Next slide, accountability number 9.
Go ahead.
No, please, Paul.
Yes, I think schools have required to have a license of operation, which is at different levels.
Okay. Okay. Accountability 9, the board is involved in interviewing and appointing the director and monitors his or her activities. There would be a policy on recruitment. The leadership staff would describe how the board is supporting them or not, and minutes between the board and the director. And the questions, 2 questions on the next slide. What do you think are the essentials of a good interview process? Remember, you're looking for a director. And then what are the essentials of monitoring a director? Maybe the word shouldn't just be monitoring, it should be supporting. So let's have 2 or 3 ideas of what you think is important in finding the right person and then maintaining the right person. Any ideas?
I wish to propose identification is very important, and through identification, rather for identification to take place, you need to advertise a particular post so that you get a variety of applicants, after which you follow the necessary steps.
Thank you very much. Anybody else?
Yes, in terms of monitoring, I also think we need the action plans available against which that the members of the board are in position to monitor what is happening that the director is overseeing in the organization.
Thank you. Humphrey?
Yeah, I wanted also to add that this is a sensitive position, and therefore you need to be sure that you are actually getting somebody credible, and so you need credible character reference forms and child protection checks with the Interpol and other sources.
Thank you. Now, I would imagine it's quite a stressful position. So how do you think the board should be supporting a director or a CEO?
I think the board should be coming in to meet the CEO on a regular basis. There could be somebody like the chair of the board who meets the CEO to find out how they're doing and what support might be required. And then there are people who have technical competencies, like people who do the finances, a treasurer, who comes in to meet the director or the finance person to just check that things are going on well and to double check that both with the finance and director. So by meeting these people.
Thank you. And Vanessa saying guidance and wisdom in making decisions. I would hope that they would be praying for that person regularly and, you know, sharing the burden with them, playing an advisory role and making sure that it's not left on their shoulders without support and prayers and, I don't know, ice cream or whatever. Let's move on. Number 10, the board has developed and approved a child protection policy and a safeguarding policy and monitors its implementation. And we would want to see that there's a child protection policy that's been approved by the board and that they are regularly monitoring how that policy is implemented. It's a very good idea that actually there's somebody on the board with specific designation as a safeguarding champion, and that's their sole focus given the business that we're in. And our question here, how do you think that the board should be involved in child protection and safeguarding? I mean, the responsibility and the task is immense. And obviously they can't be involved on a day-to-day basis, but how do you think they should be engaging in that process other than making sure there's a policy? Is there anything else that you feel the board should do?
I think the board should acquaint itself with the child protection policy of the institutions they're supporting and know it really well. And they need to be trained on child protection as well. And that could be led by the child protection champion on the board. And that's the starting place for them. Of course, they need to be also cleared to be able to work with children, that they're found fit to be working with children as they engage with both children and the organization.
Okay.
I also think, given that they are child protection key personnel within the organization, the board members should ensure that there is some sort of risk monitoring, child protection risk monitoring happening within the organization done by the board, so that we do not leave any risk, child protection risk unattended. Then I think if they also made time to meet with the child protection focal personnel in the organization, I think that would also be great in informing them about child protection within the organization.
Thank you.
And supporting reviewing of the policy on a regular basis.
Yes. And if there's particular cases that involve staff, they would have to get involved in investigations. Receiving, the child protection champion should also be receiving reports of significant concerns. I think as well, they have a responsibility to make sure that the staff who are, or volunteers who are dealing with some quite nasty cases sometimes actually get the support that they need. Number 11, the board has set or approved basic working conditions for workers and leaders. And so that includes working hours, health and safety. And we would expect to see that there would be some, at least basic HR policy, and that HR policy would have to be aligned to the law of the land. So our question on the next slide for this one, do you know what the basic working conditions are for workers by law in your country, and how would the board monitor this? And as you unmute your microphones, I'm going to tell you one which was a surprise to us when we found it. It is a legal requirement in Uganda to provide a separate eating place for lunchtime with backed chairs. Of all the things that you would think in HR, a separate eating place that has backed chairs, not stools, not benches. It's a very strange one. But anyway, what else do we know? Legal requirements of having staff. I know Humphrey has a lot to say here, so I'm going to give him 30 seconds. Imi's saying in the chat that leave is a requirement. That's correct.
Yes, one of the other things that probably some people don't normally take serious is that staff are supposed to be provided with drinking water. It's not just a privilege, but it's a requirement because it's a basic need.
Yep. And Anna said in the chat, workers' compensation is a legal requirement.
Yeah.
Anything else, Humphrey?
I think one of the other things that probably member organizations need to understand is that we normally use volunteers a lot, and it's illegal to use a volunteer to have a volunteer for more than 1 year. So if 1 year elapses, then you have to make sure that you release the person or you employ them full time.
Thank you. I can see some good information going into the chat, NSSF, contracts, PAYE. If you're responsible in any way for leading, and obviously normally there's an HR person, but if not, and you're a small organization, probably at least once a year, you have to go through the painful task of actually reading the law or finding a friend who knows the law, who can advise. Just periodically reading keeps you in check. Number 12, the board ensures regular reviews of key aspects of performance of the organization or church project. And evidence might be that there's a schedule for reviewing different aspects of the work. Maybe there's action points that come out of that review. And this is where risk management comes in as well, that in reviewing what's going on, there should be an active risk management policy and a risk register. And normally the board would be reviewing the high level risks. High possibility and high impact would be the ones where the board would come in and say, okay, we need to take insurance, or we need to change, or we need to stop, or whatever. The question is, how do you think the board should be involved in a review process? What would that look like? Must they be walking the corridors every day, checking that everybody's at work? Or do they just casually listen to a report every 3 months? What would be a balance between those two things? How would they be involved in reviewing?
I think that one example of an activity I've known is people do what they call a climate change check, which is just to say, what does it feel like in the organization now? How do people feel? Are they happy? Are they excited? And just to know some of the things that are encouraging people, and those things that need to be worked on in order for people to feel motivated to work. So it's just a climate change thing.
Thank you. All right, we're going to keep moving. We've got 10 minutes left. Number 13. The board reviews the internal financial processes of the organization or church project. Now notice this isn't the budget. The budget comes into a later standard. So this is about the financial processes, and the main evidence there is the finance policy, and that they would have signed that off and they would be reviewing it, and they would be looking at reports. My question is very simple. Who on the board should monitor the internal process? Who and how might they do it? The who is simple, and the how somebody can have a go as well. Vanessa, correct, it's the treasurer. How do you think the treasurer would do that?
The treasurer needs to meet with the finance person and the director in the organization regularly to monitor how the finances are managed.
Okay. And in a very large organization, they would delegate it to an internal auditor. And then they would receive reports from the internal auditor, I presume, every 3 months. Number 14, together with key staff, the board helps to review, approve strategies, budgets, plans for the year. Now, obviously, they can't be involved in all program design and all proposals even, but they are supposed to have the overall strategy in their minds and hearts, and then to be approving an annual budget and plan, and that would be evidenced by the meetings where they're signed off. My question is, how do you think the board should be involved in budgeting and planning? They are, unless it's a very small organization, very young, you're unlikely to have them involved in designing proposals and programs. Although within a network context, within a working group, they might be discussing some program issues. So how do they do it? Do they just delegate to the staff and wait for the results, or should they be more involved?
In a network, the ideal would be that because they are working groups which are in thematic areas, when they sit in some of those meetings with the working groups, they would know what's going on and what kinds of activities they plan to do and the budgets involved. And that's the most they could do. Otherwise, at a meeting of the board, they're usually presented with a budget at the beginning of the year and the plans for the year. Those are things they could keep monitoring at every subsequent meeting.
Okay, thank you. Number 15, Widlack, thank you. They could give input on project strategy development stages. I can't see the end of the chat, but it's there. St. Paul's, you have a comment? All right, number 15. This is the last one, and then we have a little activity to finish off with. The board makes sure that the organization or church project has enough workers who are competent and well organized in order to carry out its objectives. So one, you've got to have enough workers. They've set the strategy, they want delivery of A to Z, then they better provide staff or make sure that you've got staff to do A to Z. And if there isn't, then you can't be expected to deliver A to Z. So you might see this in an organizational structure. And my question is, how could a board assess the needs of staffing? Now, the way that we're going to look at that is to look at a chart. I set a little homework if you watched the video, that's on the next slide. was to think about an organizational structure, and possibly one that would link to like a board structure and an organizational structure, and possibly they mirror slightly. Now, there are 9 roles that we've talked about. If we go to the next slide, you'll see the little diagram I've got here. So the 9 things we've just talked about are in the top right. And I've put, just to start off the discussion, we have 5 minutes for this. I'm imagining that the board chair somehow, if there's any hierarchy, is the one that, you know, has to lead. And according to those 9 things, I've put 6 other roles, so 7 on. So my question, and they're typical posts you could add or take away. But what I want us to do is to look at those 9 things and have an opinion as to which standard goes with which board person. And then what we can't see here, but we would write in the role section, is who that person would link to on the staff team. So let's do an example. Number 7, standard 7, is legal registration. So who of those 7 roles do you think should take responsibility for ensuring that legal registration, maybe we should group them, legal registration and legal compliance. Who would be responsible for that? That's the first question on the board. So I think in the chat we're saying board legal and HR. Is there any other opinion to that? And then my question would be, who should that board legal and HR person be working with on a staff team? HR is obvious, but HR doesn't deal with all legal. So HR definitely. Admin, so your senior admin who is responsible. Okay? So somebody who is known to be good at HR and legal issues and supporting the work of the administration and the HR. Right, number 9, appoint, monitor and support the director. Who of these roles, could be one, could be more than one, do you think is responsible for the recruitment of a director and the ongoing support? I can see the board chair is going up in the chat. Any other opinions?
The board chair and the secretary.
And the secretary, okay. Everyone, Imi says everyone, and Julie says everyone. Okay, so if they want a healthy organization and they want a healthy, happy director, they should all be providing moral support, prayer, and we like ice cream as well. Number 10, child protection. That one should be obvious. Child protection would be handled by the safeguarding, correct, and the child protection champions. So the child protection champions or managers, the staff that deal with child protection cases, should be supported by that board safeguarding person with regular meetings, encouragement, prayer, discussing cases as is necessary. Number 11, HR policies and working conditions. I think we've already covered that. That would be the HR, somebody who has some HR responsibilities or knowledge. Number 12, Organizational performance management and risk. Who's going to take that one up? Board programs, safeguarding. Okay. So we are volunteering different board members in different aspects to be monitoring the performance management and risk. That's a good idea. So let's not leave it only with the board program. If it's a finance thing, it's treasurer. If it's safeguarding, then that's there. So there should be joint responsibility. Number 13, financial processes and finance policies. I hope we're going to have the first answer. 13, the treasurer, correct. And anybody else other than the treasurer? Board chair, yep. Vice chair. Normally there's 2 or 3 people on the board as signatories to the accounts, and one would hope that whoever the signatories are would also be taking responsibility. Number 14, strategies and budgets. Who is responsible for that one? The treasurer and the chair, vice chair, sorry. Strategies and budgets with the vice chair. If you're doing a 5-year strategy, who on this board should be paying attention?
Programs person should be actively involved in that one.
Okay,
All of
all
them
right.
should be involved.
Everyone. And finally, number 15, staff management. Who is responsible for staff management? HR? Correct. And then we would refer back to the comments we've already made about they should all be supporting the director in some way. All right, thank you very much for your participation in the chat. I hope we've not missed too many comments, and also in oral. And if you're struggling with your board, then this will be online later. You can share it with them. We'll send out the link. Or if you want to set up a board, there's a shorter version of this also available on the Crane YouTube site, and give an introduction, especially when you are trying to appoint new board members. Just make sure that they actually look at these standards before they commit, because there's nothing more frustrating than having board members who are not really doing what the director needs them to do in order to get the support to run organizations. Big or small organizations, they're never easy. Okay. Thank you all for participating today, and have a good rest of the day. God bless you.
Amen.